Dark Souls 3 may just be the unsung crowning achievement of Miyazaki's tenure at From Software, and with games like Dark Souls 1, Sekiro, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring under his belt, that is a bold and brash statement to say the least. But in this video, I'm going to go into why it might just be his magnum opus through its plunge into artful despair, the ability to turn something truly dreadful into something profound, and the glimmer of hope that it leaves us with. In Dark Souls 3, you play as the Ashen One, an undead who failed to become a Lord of Cinder and therefore became unkindled. You have been resurrected from the dead after failure, and it is your task to go to each of the lords who have abandoned their duty to link the flame, and link it yourself. A relatively simple premise amongst the cacophony of insanity known as the plots of FromSoft games. We will go deeper into the narrative shortly. Dark Souls 3 is the best-selling in the Dark Souls saga by far, but not quite matching the ubiquity of the most recent FromSoft release, Elden Ring. In terms of critical reception, it slightly eked out a victory against Dark Souls 1 on many platforms, although fan reception would surely conventionally place Dark Souls 3 firmly in second place behind the beloved original. So what is it exactly that makes Dark Souls 3 special? Where does this artful despair manifest most blatantly? Well, obviously in the gorgeous artwork. At first, it may appear that the world of Dark Souls 3 is muted, and, well, it is. It's literally covered in ash, a gray, seemingly colorless material that stands in place of what once was. Ash is an echo, a reverberation of previous vitality. It may have once been a vibrant forest, or a bustling city. Every piece of ash, previously living or not, is reduced to the same mild gray. This gray and its inherent narrative significance can be an instant turnoff for new players. The fantastical landscapes of games are designed to be bombastic and brilliant, something to escape to as we manifest ourselves in a hero of another realm and run away from the mundanity of life. Dark Souls 1 is full of much more vibrant landscapes, and this muted color palette just is kind of reflective of the most boring aspects of the real world. Gray, cyclical, uninspired. I think you can tell I've started a 9 to 5 recently. So what makes Dark Souls 3 special in this department? Because Dark Souls 2 has plenty of these muted moments as well, albeit not quite as artfully inspired. It has plenty of empty, windowless rooms versus vast expanses of twisting roots and collapsing civilizations. Dark Souls 3 has true direction over a significantly lowered brightness and saturation. Not to undersell Dark Souls 2 though, it does have its moments to shine as well. I think the problem comes in the assumption that these muted colors are truly lifeless and uninspired. Sure, they might not be as visually striking at first, but from the moment you begin your journey, you are hit by striking visual after striking visual. And this choice was clearly intentional. Icy mountains looming by a cliffside, a coffin tangled in tree roots, a sky castle towering in the distance as an apparent destination. The game takes its time to reveal the true colors beneath the surface, and it's no coincidence that at times ash is a required ingredient in the revitalization of forests. At times, the burning and subsequent ash are exactly what is needed to build a more beautiful future. And as you trudge through the ash, you will see more and more beautiful things. Horrible, yet beautiful. There's more color as you go through the game, and there is such a distinct artistic flair from start to finish in the architecture and grandeur of sets. Perhaps being a third in a series puts one at a disadvantage when it comes to visual surprise, but the improved graphical fidelity and visual iteration are enough to make unforgettably striking imagery time and time again throughout the runtime. I encourage you to take your time to look at the details of this game. There are components to the twisting and compelling Dark Souls 3 story that rehash or retell parts of previous games. There's a consistent revisiting of previous content, something that some deem as a critique, proof of a lack of originality. The reality is, each time familiar faces and places appear, they are earned with a slight twist to give a player an alternative perspective on a previous entity or a deeper look below the surface. They play on our familiarity with the series to subvert our hopes and expectations. Siegmeyer in Dark Souls 1 is a mysterious and somewhat aimless character. His purpose evades us, other than a vague sense of adventuring. We meet him perpetually throughout his journey, until he eventually meets his demise. In Dark Souls 3, we get a fully fleshed out tragic narrative, certainly not reaching the levels of despair that Dark Souls 1's does, but to me a similar emotional roller coaster. Sigurd achieves his goal, and we're with him for when that happens. There is the reshowing of Anor Londo, which appears much more decrepit than I could have imagined it without Gwyndoline's illusion to keep it afloat. A sign of the passage of time and the changing of values. It's reflective on our own journey as we think back to where we were when we first reached Anor Londo to where we are now. It puts us straight into a specific time frame, generations after the events of Dark Souls 1, and tells us so much more than simple fan service. There are many with more authority than me to speak on the matters of lore, so I implore you to seek them out, but as for a larger philosophical point, the game emphasizes cycles. Their need to end and be replaced with something new, but also the inertia that resists this change. Miyazaki himself wanted to break the cycle of the Souls games and move on to different projects, but he also felt this responsibility to shareholders and customers, people who desperately needed the next Souls hit. Breaking this cycle leads to an unknown future for him and the company, same as breaking the cycle of firelinking present in Souls games. The answer isn't always black and white in these games, and that's why we appreciate the world of Souls. It's not hitting you over the head with a message, but inviting you to discover your own. It's up for debate as far as dread in combat goes. For me, the daunting nature of the opponents in Dark Souls 3 heightened the dread far beyond what's possible in the first installment of the series. Perhaps the atmosphere is more powerful, but in terms of pure combat, Dark Souls 3 can't be beat. I suppose I could also see how one would prefer the sluggish combat, as it makes you feel helpless in the face of towering enemies. Outside of Manus, most of the opponents are sluggish and conquerable, although the mystical sense of horror surrounding some, such as the Gaping Dragon, do build an ominous atmosphere. Technological and mechanical limitations are present though. Dark Souls 2 reached a similar level with Demon of Song, where true horror and despair of being confronted with a guy that ugly was just something else. To me, the bigger, more horrific bosses of Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3 truly make me despair, at least upon first encounters. And that's not even mentioning the actual challenge that is far greater due to the speed of combat. In any case, the drab environments, the speedy and aggressive enemies, and the environmental storytelling all combine to create an oppressive atmosphere. That's the beauty of game development though. In a movie, or a show, or a book, there is absolute mastery of a few elements of language and creativity on display. However, in games, it is everything, from entire soundtracks to the mechanics to the artwork and beyond. And I just want to emphasize that it is okay to reshift and repurpose and rebalance multiple games in, as we're in a different gaming industry and a different time in gaming. And you have to consider that the players who are obsessed with the first Souls game can always go back and play that, so I'm glad there were some mechanical iterations to keep the game interesting. Especially considering the players were more experienced and we needed a heightened challenge. In many ways, Dark Souls 3 was a more streamlined version of Souls, with a lot of the fat trimmed off. There are fewer bosses than in any of the Souls games, even with 2 separate DLCs to add to the total. This makes it feel like every single encounter is special. Well, almost every encounter. And in all honesty, the tragic stories of each of these characters rival those of the original as well. Perhaps there isn't necessarily someone to the height of Artorias, but then again, the iteration that comes with mastering these ideas for years and years led to the Abyss Watchers, a continuation of that Artorias storyline with its own tragic twist of loss and despair. Something that every time you come back and reanalyze, you can find more details, such as the tendrils of abyss coming up from the cloaks of the boss. And just that tinge of hopefulness that Artorias' spirit is living on is emblematic of that original spirit that Artorias inspired in all of us. It even retroactively made Dark Souls 1 better. Bosses are something that I have covered extensively on this channel though, so feel free to click on any of these videos. I mean, I've surely covered those enough. When it comes to the music and sound of Souls games, They are simply unparalleled, but I think Dark Souls 3 is perhaps the best soundtrack, not only in its technical mastery, which is indeed practically unparalleled thanks to Yuka Kitamura and the other amazing composers, but also in its ability to wow within a similar niche. A lot of the Dark Souls 3 songs do sound a little bit similar to each other, but as you peel back the layers, there is so much depth and complexity specific to each boss, specific to each character, that make them endlessly re-listenable and iconic. Even some of my less preferred tracks are very impressive, such as Udex Gundir's theme. They enhance the emotional connection to the world, to the characters, and to our own visceral emotions as we're about to get gobsmacked by these guys. It far surpasses the original to me. For as much charm as it has, it lacks the depth on a lot more of the more forgettable tracks. The S-tier songs in Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2 soundtrack truly are great, but there are a handful of those compared to the dozen or so in Dark Souls 3. The DLC, too, just puts this game on a whole other level, showing that even something seen as borderline perfection by someone like myself always has a space to become even better somehow. Getting me real hyped for the Elden Ring DLC, honestly, but generally, it's just on another level musically. In Chinese philosophy, there is the concept of yin and yang, which I'm sure people are somewhat familiar with. This covers the concept of opposing forces that are also connected to each other and needed to be in balance. Masculine and feminine, chaos and order. One cannot truly thrive without the other. Souls has a similar yin and yang, with the introduction of triumph versus despair. Typically, in video games, it would be a concept more like resistance versus achievement. Losing in Mario Kart doesn't typically foster a feeling of despair, or even in something more relevant, like Skyrim, there's an opportunity to truly gear up, change the difficulty, etc. But everything is so heightened in this Dark Souls format. Deaths and failures can actually feel catastrophic, and victories can legitimately feel euphoric. And you can't have one without the other. If it's too easy to beat the boss, you don't get those positive feelings. And if it's too hard, you'll never get there. So there is this perfect balance struck with the Souls games that just leads them to have the perfect experience. And it's more immersive to be this involved with the outcome, as though we are truly slaying these demons in real life, facing the consequences of our own deaths. Part of what makes Dark Souls 3 truly strong for me is that it does provide these slight glimmers of hope and opportunity that foster and encourage more attempts, because we can't all be on the despair side. A checkpoint being slightly closer, a questline ending with a heroic charge with Yorm and Sigurd. These keep you in the realm of Souls, but keep the flame of ambition flickering just a little bit longer. And as has been discussed ad nauseum is the communal experience that comes along with this. Every Souls graduate can hold it as a badge of honor and locate fellow alumni. I love to explain my Bloodborne tattoo as a symbol of my membership to a self-flagellating cult for those who are not in the know. This shared experience evolved over the years from a tiny club to a full-on cultural moment. Elden Ring saw the values of Souls spread far and wide, and it's awesome to see so many new indoctrinated members. The way Souls has typically been thought of is as an exclusive club, so it's really nice to see that the market for people willing to engage in these deeper, more challenging stories and journeys is so massive. Because all the people who have the most passionate opinions are the loudest, especially online, usually the pure hatred or pure love of something rises to the top. The reality is, we don't know what most of the average consumers feel like on a subject a lot of the time because they just don't voice it. So it's nice to see that the silent majority is on the side of FromSoft's philosophy, even if it generally is not for everyone. With all of that being said, Dark Souls 3 is not perfect. And it's true, I don't think I can put it above Bloodborne or Elden Ring, although I would argue it is likely a more consistent masterpiece than either of those. So why is it regarded as lower by most? I would say that there is a shred less magic to the world, but I don't know if that's necessarily the fault of the game itself, or if it's because of the familiarity of the franchise. At this point, people had already been familiar with multiple games in the Souls series, up to 4, if you had played Bloodborne and Demon Souls as well, so you lose some of the magic of just this new format of game. People had this awe-inspiring experience of going to Lordran for the first time, but we just can't do that again. Not with the game following so many of the same structures. This is why Elden Ring really recaptured that magic, because it flipped so many of these systems, changed the structure just enough to make it feel like a new series, but similar enough to make it, still lovable. Compare this to like the first time you ever played RuneScape, or another classic game from a decade or two ago, going back to it now. It's not the same. It still might be addictive and lovable, but it doesn't have the same magical, new, fresh quality that it did all those years ago. And I will say the starting stretch can be slightly weaker than the rest of the game. All in all, Dark Souls 3 should not just go down as a great Dark Souls game, but one of the greatest games of all time. It utilizes despair in its characters, gameplay, artwork, and music to create an unforgettable legacy. It's my personal choice for the strongest Dark Souls game, and was my entry point into this magical world of Souls. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and click that like button. It would mean a lot to me. And check out one of these related videos here. Thank you for watching. Peace.